I want to start off by saying you should be very proud of the stories that you went out and covered. A lot of different topics I saw. I saw many of you go outside your comfort zones, go and report on things that you might not normally have reported on, talk to different types of people. So it was a really good first round of that. And I know this is difficult to do for many of you. This was the first journalistic style story that you've had to write. And it's tough. It's not like normal essay writing. So I know it's tough to do. They're not perfect. They're not supposed to be perfect. You're supposed to be getting better and learning. So you're supposed to be taking the feedback that I give you and applying it. If you weren't happy with the grade you got on this first one, we have 3 other stories coming down the line. And if you take the feedback that I apply in my personal comments to you and the general feedback I'm about to give right now in this video, you're going to see and you apply it, you're going to see your grade improve. Because all of you had the foundation there. I can't always say this with every class. Sometimes some students just don't. It does not seem like they're grasping it. Everybody in this class, and I mean this, everybody in this class I could see had the foundation, right? Yeah, I could see that you had the pieces, in there, that you understood the general concepts. Some stuff needed, like I wrote in many of your comments, some things needed to be polished up, some things needed to be moved around, you needed to work on certain areas, but you at least had everything there in some form. And that's great because now you'll be able to build on that and improve. So I'm really looking forward to the next round of stories that we're going to be getting because I just think these are going to get so much better. So let's talk about what you're going to be doing this week. You're going to read chapter 17, and in chapter 17, you only have to read pages 322 to 333. So you only have about 10 pages that you have to read this week. Read these pages in this chapter. You can read the whole chapter if you want, but the quiz questions will be based within these pages. And then also the quiz, which is the next item here, the quiz will be from the reading of this week and last week. So it's the feature stories and storytelling and the profile story. It's going to be a combination, will be the quiz this week. You're going to begin your feature story, so your next writing assignment's coming down, and I'm going to talk about that in this story. And of course, you're going to be reading news every day like you have been throughout the semester. I'm also about to give you some general feedback for the hard news story because, again, I want you to be able to apply this to your to the next story that you're going to be doing. So let's go right into that. General feedback from the hard news story. So I'm giving feedback that I saw happen. What I'm saying here is things that I saw happen in a lot of different stories. I'm not saying all of you did all of these things. Some of you didn't do any of this. Some of you did a lot of this, right? So I want to just give you some general feedback that I think I see are kind of like problem areas. And this happens. Some of the stuff I didn't really cover that well, so a little bit of it's on me, and I'll even talk about it. I mean, not everything here I took points off for, but this is now what I want you to do to improve for the next story that you're going to be writing. So first, keep paragraphs short, right? And we have talked about this one. It was even in the instructions for the assignment, but paragraphs are short in journalism. Remember, we talked about this before. If they started when it was print, and you had a print newspaper, right? And if you have huge paragraphs that are 7, 8 sentences long, then it fills up the entire newspaper, the entire page, the entire column, right? And it's too hard. People can't process information because there's no breaks. So paragraphs became short, and that transferred over in the web. That's how we read. Look at any web story, even the Washington Post one I made you just read last week, right? All those paragraphs are short. So when I say short, it's 1 to 3 sentences. That's what you're aiming for. 1 to 3 sentences. And I know I said 4 or 5 at the most, and some of you did have 4 or 5 sentences in a paragraph, but that was too many for the paragraphs that I read. You could have broken it up. So again, thinking about how to break it up, one main idea and then break it up. So I'm going to give an example right now because this is where it gets maybe a little confusing. Let's say I say, I don't know, Middlesex students are studying journalism. The class is 5 weeks long. The professor is Professor Chiara, who used to practice journalism. He, now I get another sentence, right? Well, even though it's all related, when you start talking about Professor Chiara, when you start talking about me, it's a new paragraph because it's kind of a new idea. Yes, they're related, But first you were talking about Middlesex students and that they're in this 5-week course. Then you start talking about me, right? And yes, I'm part of that course, but I'm a different subject. That's a new idea. Break up that paragraph. And that's kind of my example. A lot of you would have a paragraph like that where it was 5 or 6 sentences and they would be related, right? It would be all related, but you definitely could break it up. When in doubt, break it up. Okay? It's okay to have one sentence paragraphs. In fact, look at all the news. I tell you to be reading news every day. Part of that is so you can start to see the practice. Look at those stories. One sentence paragraphs, 1 and 2 sentence paragraphs are like the average. You're going to see 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1. You know, that's how it gets broken up. So one sentence paragraphs are fine. In fact, that's usually, you know, what you should probably be aiming for. If you can do it in 1 or 2 sentences, that's the golden. All right. Avoid using subjective language. So this is where it gets a little tricky. Remember, subjective language is when you're inserting what you believe you're perceiving in the situation. And I'll give you an example. I gave you some words. I saw a lot of unfortunately, luckily, everyone does it. So here's what I mean. If you say something like, unfortunately, no one was able to get into the event past 10 o'clock. Well, it might be unfortunate, but it's not your job to be designating that it was an unfortunate situation. Just say it. Nobody was able to get in after 10 o'clock. Remember, in hard news stories, you are just trying to report the facts. You're just reporting the facts. You're not trying to interject any opinion. We're going to talk about when you do interject an opinion, but in hard news stories, it's just the facts. So when you say something like, luckily, it wasn't raining, or I'll give you a better example. The event was held outside. Luckily, it wasn't snowing. Okay? You might, for most people, that probably is lucky. But you know what? A lot of people love the snow. Maybe they wanted the event out in the snow. So it's not so lucky for them, right? And that's my point. Get rid of luckily. There's no reason to do it. Just say it wasn't snowing for the event. You know, the weather anticipated snow and it didn't snow. That's the fact you're reporting. By throwing luckily in there, some people might have wanted it to snow. Now I kind of gave an example here that might not apply to everything that we're talking about, because maybe some of them are, you think there's no way that anybody wouldn't think it's lucky, but there's no reason to put those words in. Just keep them out. Just report the facts. Let the person on the other end perceive if that was lucky or not, if that was unfortunate or not. Hopefully that's making sense. It's always tough when I do these videos because obviously I can't see your face, so I can't read if this is making sense or not. But I'm hoping this is making sense for you. And the last one is everyone. So I'll give an example, and because there's a few people that reported on concerts or about being somewhere, and they said everyone had a good time, everyone was enjoying it, everyone was singing along, right? Well, many people might have been, but you don't know for a fact unless you were able to look at every single person in that crowd if everyone was singing in there, right? If everyone knew the words to the song, if everyone was having fun. You just don't know that. So you could say something like, it was evident that many people were enjoying the concert because they were dancing, or many people were singing along at the end and all joined in. That as a reporter, you can report accurately. You know that many people were because you heard a lot of people or you saw a lot of people, but you don't know that everybody was. So be careful when you use everyone. Unless there's 4 people in the room and you saw all 4 people doing something, you stay away from the words like everyone, right? I know that might seem like a small thing, but hopefully you can understand why it could be a big thing, because maybe a lot of people in that room weren't having a good time, and all of a sudden now they come back to you, the reporter, and say, we weren't having a good time. You reported on that inaccurately, right? That wasn't the sense that we had. So be careful using those kinds of like broad-based words. Be careful using these subjective words where you don't really know if it's luckily for everyone or unfortunate for everyone, right? So just get rid of these. There's no reason to have them. Just report on what's going on. That's all you need to do. That leads me to where there could be some confusion. So I know we just had a chapter about opinion pieces and use reporters when you do opinion. So oftentimes opinions and the things that we were talking about in that chapter, that's for what we call op-eds, and the chapter talked about that, right? Opinion editorials or editorials. We're going to cover that chapter. We're going to cover that topic more in depth in a couple of weeks. But there's break down journalism into, there's hard news, which we just covered. There's feature stories, which we're covering now and which you're going to be doing. There's also opinion, right? And that's where it's clearly marked that this is an opinion piece. It's the journalist is writing it in the first person, unlike the other ones that we're learning where we write third person, and they're talking about their opinions, right? And that's okay. It's clearly identified, and we know that's an opinion piece. Hard news stories and feature stories aren't opinion pieces. They're not opinion. So with that, you can't be subjective. You can't use this kind of language. You can't talk about your opinions. On opinion pieces, which we will do in a few weeks, that's when you're allowed to. It's a different style of writing within journalism, and you're allowed to do that. And that's where a lot of that stuff that we learned about last week about what's opinion, what's libel, what's actual malice, all that stuff. That's really what that more relates to. So I make that point because I want you to know that I want you just to be aware of in these first pieces that we're writing, you're keeping all opinions out, right? When I say there's a time and a place, that's op-ed writing. That's editorial writing, which we'll cover. Right now, though, the time and place is hard news and feature stories, and you're not putting in any subjective language. You're not putting in any opinions. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear because I could see that why that might be a little confusing if you just read that chapter. Then you're thinking about, I'm telling you not to use subjective language. Again, it's what style, what's your aim for? And right now, the aim is not to write opinion pieces. Oh, I see I missed one, and I'm going to have to add one here in a second. But all right, next thing, lead with a quote. This one is not one we really covered, but now that you're starting to get a little bit more advanced, let's talk about that. When you say a quote, when you have somebody's quote, I know the natural inclination is to say the person's name first. So like Professor Chiara said, and then say the quote. It's actually the opposite. Lead with the quote first. So it would be, boy, it's a beautiful day, Professor Chiara said, right? Even if it's the first time you're introducing me, start with a quote. Here's the reason why, and I don't want to get too technical, but here's the reason why. The quote is the most powerful part of that sentence, and you always want to lead with the most powerful part of that sentence. So lead with the quote, and then put the person's name. When someone's reading, you can quickly figure out, who said it and put it in context after. So what ends up happening is we read the quote, we go, that's really interesting, and then when we see the person, then it kind of puts it into full picture. I'm trying to think of a better way to explain this. It's almost like, well, I don't want to confuse you too much, but put the quote first. The quote is the most exciting part, then put the person's name. Even if it's the first time you're introducing them, then put the person after that, after the quote, right? Put the attribution at the end. It's still going, people are still going to be able to figure it out, and the quote is the more exciting part. Is that rule followed 100% of the time? It's not even really a rule. Is that guideline followed 100% of the time? No, of course not. And there's always, a time where maybe that doesn't make sense. So, I understand you're reading news stories and they don't always do it that way. And you're not saying you always do it that way. But in this, when we're first learning, the general practice, most of the time, that's the way it's done. So let's start at least getting in the habit of that. Lead with your quote, put the attribution afterwards. It just makes your writing more compelling, makes it more powerful. Give your story a title. Some of you just didn't put a title. Make sure you put a title in your story. Title's not the same as a lead, so just make sure you remember the difference, but you need to give your story a title. And the last thing, which I didn't add in this video, but I will add it as soon as this is done, is leads are one sentence. I saw a lot of leads with 2 sentences, sometimes more. Leads are always one sentence. Every once in a while, you can get away with a 2-sentence lead, but I don't even want to give you guys that option. When you're first learning right now, 1 sentence. Figure out how to get it into 1 sentence. And I also will say a lot of you did some really nice leads. Nice job following those rules in that chapter because those leads were really good. And some of you had really good leads except for it was 2 or 3 sentences. So you could have condensed it, as I gave comments in many of yours, you could have condensed it into 1 sentence and then that other information goes into the nut graph. But you had all the pieces there. You had the right idea. It was just making it into 1 sentence. Look, it's tough to do. Now, no one's saying any of this stuff is easy. It's tough to do. You're going to struggle for a while to get that into 1 sentence. But that's your job. So, figure out how to get it into 1 sentence. And I will add that here into this feedback. All right, again, that was some just general feedback. I gave you more specifics in your document. So if you haven't gone back, look at that feedback. If you're confused, message me. But I give you really specifics in there. And this is a process. These are steps. This is my feedback this time. Your next story is going to be a little better, but then we're going to start talking about new things to work on and new mistakes, and it's going to keep progressing. And for your final story, you'll put it all together. So you guys are on the right track. For a first one, you should be proud. These were good. All right, let's talk about what your homework is now. I already talked about you got your quiz, and we got your new writing assignment. So this can also be found in assignments under writing, but let's take a look at your profile story. All right, so it's what you've been learning in your chapter this week. You're going to write a profile story. You must write about an interesting person, and it cannot be a family member or friend. It should be someone you don't know at all, or just an acquaintance. So I don't want you doing it on your brother, your sister, your aunt, your roommate, your mom, your dad, your best friend. I want you to go outside your comfort zone. It could be an acquaintance, right? So it could be a friend of a friend. It could be, I'll just give you a typical one. I'm just thinking ones I've had students often do. You know, students have a friend that's in a band, so they do one of the bandmates. So they can't do their friend, but they do one of the bandmates that are in the band that they might have met some before, but they don't really know that well. Or, you know, you do your, I would even let you get away with this. I mean, you have like a coach, if you're a part of a team or part of a theater club and you're, you know, your acting coach. You know, you might know, you go to classes, you know them fairly well, but you don't know them that well, right? You know, you haven't gone to their house for dinner. So you could do it on them. I want you to do people that you don't know their life story, because the problem is you become too subjective. We all do. In fact, journalists, if they know somebody too well, they have another journalist cover that story or cover that person, because it's becomes too subjective. You already have like this prejudgment, this preconceived notion about things with them. I want you kind of going in with a blank slate, knowing very little about that person, because then that will really get you to ask the right questions and learn about them, and maybe find out things you didn't know. You know, so I want you to find somebody. I'm not going to know for 100% if you take your best friend. I understand that, but I'm hoping it's the honor system. I'm hoping that you'll do this. This will make you better. It'll make you better by doing this, and it'll make your story better. Often I find if you do it not on somebody you know, your story is better. So can't be a family member or friend, an acquaintance, or someone or a stranger. I've had students do it before on like they would get coffee, at a gas station every day. They see the same kind of person. They ask that person if they could interview them. People get flattered when you do that. Just thinking of another one, a student who had a part-time job somewhere, and it was like the custodial person, the janitor there. She would, I can't remember now if it was a he or she, but whoever the student was would see them in the hallway every once in a while and say hi. They did a profile on them. They said, "Hey, do you mind? I'm doing this story for a class I'm taking. Do you mind if I write a story?" People get flattered by that. So go outside your comfort zone. You'd be really interested. It could be really interesting who you get. So you're going to be doing a profile on them. You're going to put it in a Word document. Don't write it on Blackboard. We've talked about that. Here's the things that I'm going to be looking for. Your story must not use reporting from other stories or direct language from other stories. So if you do somebody that's like has had other journalists write stories on them, maybe a coach or something, don't take direct reporting from them or old quotes from them from that story, right? Everything you do is original reporting. It's original stuff. You have to have, here's a little difference from the last one, you have to have at least 4 direct quotes that you obtained. So again, it's you getting the quotes. It's original quotes. It can't be a quote that was on a website or that was in a brochure that they have or whatever, right? It has to be quotes that you got from them talking to them. Remember, word for word, at least 4. Something you could also do, and you're going to have to do this for your final assignment, is you could also interview that person and somebody else that knows that person, like you learned from in our chapter. So if you're interviewing that bandmate, right? Maybe you're doing the bandmate, and then maybe you're interviewing somebody else, another bandmate of theirs, and to talk about that person. So you could do that. Depends how ambitious you want to get on this assignment. But at the very least, 4 quotes. So even if it's from that person, 4 quotes. Be between 650 and 750 words, so it's a little longer than before, 650 to 750 words. And I am going to make a quick comment on this. If you're below the word count, you're not. I mean, if you're below the word count, the most you could get would be a C if everything else is perfect. All right, because you already missed a huge part of the assignment, and I guarantee that it's not going to be perfect, because if it's below 650 words, you probably don't have enough information in there. Some of you had struggled with that with a hard news story, or I've had other students struggle with that in other semesters. They're at 500 words when it says 650. You're 150 words short of the minimum, right? You're going to need that to cover all this stuff. So, make sure you're following all these directions. Hit that word count at the very least, first of all, because that's what's being asked of you. And these words are also because that's usually what it takes to get all the information that you need on whatever the subject is. So make sure you're doing that. Short paragraphs, we already talked about that. 1 to 3 at the most, or 1 to 3, 5 at the most, though. This is very rare. You should all be aiming for 1 to 3. And you could probably do that with all these stories. Be written in the third person. Here's what I'm going to be looking at besides this stuff up here. How well defined the focus is. That's from the chapter we just read. How well is the theme presented throughout the story? If background information is the background information presented strategically? Is the writing clear, concise, and informative? Right? Did you just give me fluff, or did you give me really deep information about this person? The quality of quotes. So if you just say a quote that say the quote is, "Yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles." That's not a great quote. You could say that about the person. You could just say, "So and so grew up in Los Angeles." If the person says, "Yeah, every time I see evergreens, all I can think about is, man, they're not palm trees because I really miss California." That's a good quote. That talks about the spice of the person. Now we're starting to get a flavor of who that person is, right? So that's the difference when I say quality of quotes. It's not just, Professor Shara needs me to get 4 quotes in there, so I'll just put in anything. I'm looking for, what kind of quotes did you actually use? Are you using quotes that help give the flavor of the person, especially for a profile story? A profile story, we're really starting to get the idea of who this person is. We're starting to get a feel of them. What better way than using quotes, like the book talked about? The quotes are how we start to learn what their personality is, right? So think about taking quotes that help me understand the personality of the person. That's what you're looking for. How well the goal method is used, that's in the chapter, so you'll understand that by the end. If turning points were addressed, that's in the chapter. AP style, you guys know that, and pretty actually good job with your AP style. Many of you followed AP style, so I'm usually, that's a feedback I have to give. You guys followed it for the most part, so good work with that. Continue doing that. AP style. How well the lessons from the chapters are being applied. So not just the chapters for the feature story, but past chapters. It all builds on each other. So are you following the lessons we've been learning? And of course, did you edit for all spelling and grammar mistakes? It is due November 4th, so you have 3 weeks to do this. I figure this week is good to go find somebody and interview. Next week, write the story. Last week, edit. That's perfect, best case scenario. But it might take you some time to connect with someone, so get working on this early. All right, that was a lot of information I had to give you this week, but hopefully you're feeling okay. Everything's making sense here. If not, as always, message me. I'd be happy to go in more depth. If you're really confused by feedback I gave you on your hard news story, something else we could always do is call or Skype or something. So if you want me to talk to you face to face, or virtually, but if you want me to talk to you and we can go into more depth, I'd be happy to do that instead of having to write back and forth. So that's always an option for you as well. But looking forward to these next round. I have a feeling they're going to be just I have a feeling that you guys are going to really take these lessons and just run with it, because I can tell that this is what this kind of class is. You guys are getting it. It's now just forming it and polishing it. But I'm looking forward to seeing these, and I'll see you next week.